Oh my God, I just got chills. That is crazy. Today we are reviewing my latest read, which is Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, while I do my makeup. So I hope you enjoy. I was really not expecting to love this book as much as I did. I literally just finished it maybe 15-20 minutes ago, and like I knew that if I didn't immediately sit down to film something, I would lose everything. My mind would go empty because I just have to talk about this like immediately, right? If you're expecting a true crime, just like straightforward true crime play-by-play type of book, you're not gonna get it. That's not what this book is. And it's actually really sad that it's kind of been boiled down to that, because it is much, much more. I've been referring to it as a time capsule into Savannah, Georgia in the early 80s to the beginning of 1990. The author does such a good job, because I just want to put out that the author is also the narrator in this, because he spent time in Savannah, Georgia as like a reprieve from the hustle and bustle of New York. And it just so happened that his time there coincided with the events of the true crime story that does take place in the novel. But really, he set out to, write a novel about Savannah. And that's exactly what he did. It just so happened that in the meantime, somebody who he had gotten acquainted with was charged with murder. And it so eloquently puts all of the pieces of this big puzzle together that if you were just looking for a straightforward, run-of-the-mill true crime novel, you are going to be sorely disappointed. I just cannot say enough good things. So the story takes place with the author starting to live. He started out wanting to like spend part of his time in Savannah and part of his time in New York. And slowly he begins to spend more and more time in Savannah. And he meets this colorful and beautiful cast of players and characters in this story, and begins writing this book. Not see that. Y'all did not see that. So the author / narrator is meeting all of these wonderful people, and the book begins with his first introduction to our killer, if that's even the right word to say. Jim Williams, who was a prominent antiques dealer / historic preservationist in Savannah from like the 1960s through the 80s. And so we have a first introduction of this character, and he's described as not as arrogant or not as I guess, I don't know what the word is. but we're just gonna go with arrogant. Like, not as arrogant as the rest of, like, the high society people in Savannah, but he still is very much like, shoot, I'm like blanking on the word that I'm trying to use here. I guess a little out of touch with like normal people a little bit. Like, he doesn't flaunt his wealth in the way that some of the other cast of characters does, but he definitely wants you to know that he's successful / wealthy in the way he talks about his antiques business in the city of Savannah. So we're introduced to him like right off the bat. And in being introduced to him, he's talking about some of the other characters at play in Savannah. And so from there, our author / narrator, John, kind of gets an introduction to a couple other people like around town and goes and like mingles with them. And so next we're introduced to Joe Odom, who likes to have himself perceived as like a very successful businessman, but in reality he's just a big con artist. And like you kind of figure that out very quickly. Throughout the story, he's like moving from house to house because he's using these houses as like tourist traps and doing so illegally because he's renting them from people and then skipping out on his rent. And so like I think he has like 4 or 5 different addresses throughout the duration of this novel. So he's, friends with Jim Williams as well due to like his 4th wife or something like that. Just like not a very savory character, but nonetheless. And then we get introduced to Luther Druggers, I think Druggers or Duggars. And he's a man who has a reputation around town for being kind of this recluse weirdo who happens to have some kind of poison at his disposal that could literally kill the entire town in one drop. And upon John meeting him, he finds out that this is actually true. He does have a bottle of poison that could kill the entire town. And at first, not knowing much about this book, I thought, okay, maybe this comes into play like in the murder. So you'll have to read it to see if it does. And I was like, okay, well, this has to have something to do with this murder, right? And we're also introduced to Serena Dawes, which is like this woman who kind of makes all of her money by getting with rich men. And the best character of this whole entire freaking thing, who like was so unexpected, but like I love her to pieces, is the Empress of Savannah, the Lady Savannah, the Lady Chablis. The Lady Chablis, the Empress of Savannah. And when I tell you, I have never, and this is a real person, like it's her real name and everything, like I would have loved to have met her. But she is a transgender woman who has a drag show, and she is the most colorful character ever. She is so hilarious and so authentically herself. like, there's a scene towards the end of the book where you don't know whether to be mortified or to laugh your ass off at some of the things that she does, but we love her. We love Miss Lady Shibley. So we're introduced to all these characters, and like the first half of the novel is really setting up the scene, and we're introduced to Danny Hansford, which is the victim of the killing in this novel at the hands of his boss, Jim Williams, who we mentioned at the very beginning. So now we kind of know everyone's relationship and how everything kind of intertwines together. And in the second half, the first half ends with the narrator hearing the news that Jim Williams is being charged with murder. So the second half of the book takes place in the events that follow the murder and the 4 consecutive trials that Jim Williams has to try to clear his name. And then it really becomes a true crime story, but not just like, okay, let's forget about these other characters and just focus on what happens with this rich white man, right? Even though a lot of the focus is on him, it also does, I think the author, just because of the sheer fact that he was living in Savannah at the time and is the narrator of the story, really puts into perspective what a whole town or community goes through when something shocking like this happens, and what people say about each other, and like the little gossip and things that you hear about everybody when something as crazy as this happens. And just the fact that he lived it and then was able to write the story about it is a perspective I don't think, like, a first-hand account perspective that we normally get when it comes to a true crime story. And for that, I think it's freaking amazing that this story was told. Like, great, amazing. So the second half is all about what happens. So Jim is charged with murder almost like immediately. Like, he claims that it was in self-defense, that Danny, who was his employee, had they had had an argument. Danny tries to shoot Williams, and Williams in return fires a shot back at him, killing him. And it actually turns out that he has shot him initially and then twice more. So we learn that Williams has had some disputes, some disagreements, some kind of like petty, stupid disagreements with his neighbors, the Adlers. So editing me here, when I'm trying to explain like about Jim's personality and how he wasn't arrogant, but tone deaf, I think is one of the words that I need to use here, because at one point he didn't agree with the filming of a movie that was happening in the courtyard in front of his house. And so, like, instead of like just telling these people to go away or calling the police, he decides to hang a Yahtzee flag outside of his house so that it would ruin all of the shots in the movie. And of course his neighbors and the people in the community didn't know that that's why he was hanging this flag. So like rumors were spreading that he was a Yahtzee sympathizer, and this is what I'm talking about when I say like the Adlers had issues with him, because like the Adlers were kind of like, oh, well, maybe he is, you know, this way or whatever. When I really think that this is a case where somebody is like tragically tone deaf and like arrogant and just doesn't care that this could affect other people without actually believing in what he's doing. He was just doing this like for his own benefit and for his own like FU to these filmmakers at the expense of some of the people in his community. And the Adlers are really great friends and donated a large amount of money and supported the current district attorney, Spencer Lawton. And so it's, you know, when he's charged with murder, almost immediately, the author, the townsfolk, everybody who is close with Jim is like, this is because of the Adlers. They pressured Lawton to file charges against him because they disagree with Williams. So at the first trial, it comes under scrutiny that possibly Williams had been having a sexual relationship with Danny Hansford, and they were more than just had more than just a business relationship. And to this, Jim Williams is like, absolutely not. That never happened. We had a strictly business relationship. So that is what is believed to have sealed the coffin for Jim's first conviction. But then his lawyers file an appeal, and there's a retrial. And so that seals the deal again, and he's convicted of murder for the second time. Well, then the third time rolls around, and this time there's a woman on the jury. So this time it comes out with evidence that the reason why there was no gunpowder on Danny's hands was because the crime scene wasn't sealed off well enough, and the police actually made some major mistakes and didn't put something to protect Danny's body and protect his hands from any evidence being accidentally wiped away. And the police up until this point had testified that yes, in fact, they did have something on his hands to protect them from the gun residue washing off or anything like that happening. And it turns out a nurse at the hospital, when Danny's body arrives there, was the one who bagged up his hands. So the whole time that Danny's body is being transferred from place to place, from the house to the ambulance, to the ambulance to the hospital, to the hospital to the morgue, this whole time his hands could have been jostled around, up against his clothes. Anything could have happened to where the gunpowder residue could have been wiped off accidentally. But unfortunately for Jim, this time on his jury is a woman who all the other jurors want to convict him for the third time. But this woman's actually, which I don't know how they didn't capture this or like dismiss her from duty even before when they were selecting the jury. But she reveals that in the past, she had a boyfriend who was abusive, who pulled a knife on her, and she stabbed him in self-defense. So she knew how that felt. And she, no matter like what they said, was not going to convict this man to prison, to life in prison, because her more than anyone knew what it was like to act in self-defense. So the jury was at a standstill. And in this second half of the book, I also, and I'm so sorry I failed to mention this so far, there is a woman named Minerva. Minerva is a voodoo practitioner. And Jim Williams, you know this from the beginning of the book, and you hear about this from the beginning of the book. He's very kind of superstitious in a way, and kind of believes in, like, not necessarily mind control, but basically in the ability to control your own mind and your own circumstances. So he, even though he doesn't believe that this woman can actually, like, work real magic, he believes that if he believes that it'll work. So she's been kind of, like, doing a voodoo practice for him to try to get him out of jail and out of trouble. And so everybody on the jury and the judge and the district attorney are pressuring this woman on the jury who believes that he was acting in self-defense, since she knows what it's like to act in self-defense more than any of them. They're really, really, at this point, after like a couple of weeks worth of trial and what's the word? Not jury selection. Jury deliberation. Like, they just want this to be over with and to send him to prison. Since all 11 of the 12 jurors want him to go, like, she needs to just go with the group, basically. And she won't. She refuses. And so because of this, Jim is like, I need Minerva to work her magic on these jurors and keep this woman safe, because she's my only hope. But eventually, this leads to a mistrial, which is a good thing, because that means there can be a new trial and Jim has another chance. So finally, at this fourth trial, they have a change of venue. So no longer is it the same judge and the same town. They move it to Augusta, Georgia. The victim, Jim, is finally acquitted of murder and is sent home to live out the remainder of his days at his beautiful home that he restored himself, with his antiques and his cat and his mother, who, while he's in jail this whole time, has been taking care of his home. And I don't want to give too much away about the details of his passing, because that more than the murder shocked me, if that's actually, like, factual. What he wrote about how Jim died, just that really, I was like, oh my God, that's crazy. So I'll let you read the book, and I won't give it away, even though I want to tell you so bad. I'm like one of the town gossips. I just want to tell you so bad. But I won't give it away. You'll have to read the book. But regardless, this book is one of the best true crime books I've ever read, because it's not like stuck in like the minutia of details. It's telling this elaborate story. But like, I cannot talk enough about Miss Lady Chablis. She is a character to beat all characters. Her parts of this book were my favorite parts. Forget the murder trial. I mean, I love true crime, but Lady Chablis is where it's freaking at, okay? Just amazing. I loved this book. And I really hope that... I can't even finish my makeup. I'm talking about it so much. I'm going to finish with the Sage the Day palette from ColourPop. I don't know why, but like my living room is painted a really dark green. And for whatever reason, like pictures I've seen of the Mercer house that Jim Williams lives at and everything, just these like green and brown colors really like they just give Savannah. So I'm going to be using this palette for my eyes today. But overall, like I've said before, if you're expecting this book to be a like cut and dry true crime story, you are not going to like it, Buster. It is not going to be your cup of tea. But if you want to immerse yourself in Savannah, in a vibrant city full of all kinds of colorful and eccentric and wonderful characters, wonderful and not so wonderful characters, I would definitely recommend reading this book. Even if you're somebody that doesn't particularly like true crime, but likes history or just a mystery novel, I would recommend you give this book a try. It's so good. Like, it is so good. And I was not expecting it. After reading some of the reviews, I was like, okay, I'll read this book, but it seems like people really don't like it. But then after reading it, I'm like, I don't know what these people are freaking talking about. This is an amazing freaking book. I will give a couple of like slight trigger warnings because I know that in the day and age that we're living in, a lot of things might be too much. So I'll give a trigger warning that this book does deal with a lot of homophobia and racism. And if that's not something that you're interested in reading about or hearing about, skip this. Like, if that's something that's going to affect you right now, I just would skip this book for a while. It's not like a must read right away, but I will say it is a good book and that I think a lot of people in the true crime space or not would enjoy. And if you plan on visiting Savannah and you really want to like know about Savannah, read this book before you go. Because when I was in Savannah, we went on like a little like ghost tour thing, and that's when I learned about a lot of these, I learned about this case. And like, it was really interesting, but we were only there for a day, so not long enough to where like I could delve into it. And so this book has always been, because of that, on my TBR. And so now that I've finally read it, I'm like, okay, maybe I want to go back to Savannah and like, you know, I think the home is open to tours, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like a museum now, like maybe take a museum tour or something along those lines. I think that would be really fun, especially like knowing the history of the book and everything. I think it'd be really interesting to do something like that. So, might do that. Other than that though, I'm just gonna finish up my makeup here and then wrap up my final thoughts. I think this book would be great for true crime lovers, history lovers, and just people who love to travel. I think this book would be an amazing book for all of those people, and I give it 5 stars. Go ahead and follow me on Storygraph. And I will see you in my next video.